I'm doing quite well. Arlen, I appreciate the invitation. For those of you tuning in, it looks like we have 5 or 6, maybe 7 states at this point. Welcome. Assuming that some of you are done with your day, some of you are getting towards the end of it. First thing I want to do is just look at you and say thank you for who you are, for what you do. One of my friends said right now, trust is a hard thing. And she said, a lot of people don't want to trust for whatever reason, yet you are in a position that requires trust. Some of you know the book Speed of Trust by Covey. And when we do trust, man, things move quicker. And so that's what we want to talk about is how do we create a people first culture through tiny moments. And so some of you have already done this. You put down where you're from, but I want you to add one more thing because it adds a dynamic that is personal. What is something you like to do for fun? So if you go to the chat box and if you've already put your name and where you're from, that's fine. If you haven't, put your name where you're from. And what is something you do for fun? And I played basketball for 40 some years until the knee gave out. So now it's golf. I tried to do pickleball and golf, but the knee said, "No, I picked one." And right now, I'm loving golf, and so it's something I love to do. How about you? What's something that you like to do? If you just put it into the box, it's yep, golf, travel, play and write music. Yep, quilting and sewing, very cool. It's kind of interesting when you get on these calls and you start to realize that, hey, we have something in common, and then we start to run into each other at an event, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, didn't you say, or wouldn't be fun? So yep, like to run on trails and just start. Yep. And welcome camping. Yep, it's the best. Are you a tent camper? Are you a trailer motorhome camper? That's always interesting. I grew up tent camping and got to the point where, man, my hip just didn't want to do it anymore. Haven't ever got the camper van yet. So hiking, anything outdoors, Jacqueline, very cool. Yep. Attend theater and musical events. Yeah, I got tickets to see Keith Urban the end of May. So I think a lot of, oh, I was going to tell you too, if you've not been to the Sphere yet in Las Vegas, I would encourage it. A year ago, we got to see Bono and U2 there. And then my buddy who I went with a year ago, he called his wife and my wife, like, let's go again. And the Eagles were playing and they took it to another level. So if you get a chance to get to Vegas, I'm not a huge Vegas guy, but man, the Sphere was well worth it. So just kind of fun to see. So what we're going to try to do in this talk is to give you some strategies, some thoughts around mindset. But what I'd love for you to do is if in this time that we spend together, whether you have 15 minutes or an hour, that we can give you 3 or 4, maybe 10 quick ideas that you can use. And where do we come up with this people first mindset is the truth is we're people first, we're professionals second. And if we recognize that all the folks that we're leading have a personal life, and some of them are going through really great things right now, some of them are going through difficult things right now. But on your staff, in your office, in your community, there's going to be a roller coaster of these experiences. And so, what we've learned is we start with people first in mind. Oftentimes, it grounds people, it causes people to say, hey, they care about me. And we talked to a woman on a flight about a year ago. She just retired at 53. And my wife said, that's pretty young to retire. She goes, yeah, I didn't want to leave. But she said, my principal, my leader was so focused on curriculum and data that we lost sight that, hey, we're people first. And she said the previous principal that we'd had would just always be by the front door and just greet us coming in. I'm so glad you're here today. I hope you're doing well. At the end of the day, would try to be in the most common spot, not just for kids, but for us as adults who are leaving maybe 10 minutes, an hour later, whatever, just to look us in the eye and say, thank you. And she said it meant so much. And so what we want to do in this talk is just give you some of those little things. We believe that leadership it's in tiny moments. And so one of the things that we sometimes talk about is how do we connect people? And so when you start thinking about connections, some of you know I created Link Crew and Web. Those are programs where we welcome new students through orientation. It's probably the largest orientation programs in the continent. Our employees bought it from us years back. But back then, I used to think about icebreakers and team builders kind of as the same thing. And I've recognized there's actually 3 levels of connecting people. An icebreaker is some simple little thing that maybe takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes. You've seen the deal where you play rock, paper, scissors, or perhaps fast fingers. One that's real easy. I explain it to you. It's called fast fingers. I turn to my partner and we go 1, 2, 3, go on bringing. We on go. We bring out a certain number of fingers, and whoever can total the fingers on their hand and my hand the fastest wins. So if you bring out 2 and I bring out 3, whoever can say 5 the fastest wins that round. Well, I would encourage you try that sometime tomorrow, next week. Take it, whether you walk into a classroom, say, hey, can I have your students for 5 minutes? Whether they're third graders, whether they're in high school, say everybody turn to the kid next to you. If there's a group of 3, that's fine. It's just called fast fingers. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, go. Bring out a certain number of fingers, and whoever can yell out the total the fastest wins. I tell you what, people will be laughing and giggling, and they'll be like, let me do it again. And maybe they play 2 or 3 times with that partner. Say, guys, I just wanted to practice something. Thank you. And head out. Maybe you're in a staff meeting, you do that. It's a simple little icebreaker. And their activities are low risk, and they usually last 90 seconds, 2 minutes at the most. Then we've all heard of team builders. Well, a team builder is when I give you a stack of spaghetti noodles, some marshmallows, and a team, maybe 5 or 6 of you, say, hey, build the tallest tower that you guys can using just the tools I've given you. Well, so many of you on this call have done that before. You know what happens. Someone says, all right, let's go. Let's grab this here. Someone else on the team said, hey, let's draw it out on a piece of paper so we know what we're doing. Someone else says, hey, I was at an Avid conference last week. Let me tell you what we did. And through team building, what happens, you start to see people's personalities start to emerge. And some people are detail people. Some people are off the hip people. And it gives you a chance to say, hey, let's talk about that. But what we've learned is in between an icebreaker and a team builder is what we call a relationship builder. And this is an activity that provides the opportunity for people to share their story and build empathy for others. And sometimes it's as simple as, let's do an activity called One at a Time. And you and I, let's say that we're partners, and I just tell you one thing about me, and you tell me one thing about you, and we go back and forth for 60 seconds. I had a student introduce that to me years ago, and she says, it's the easiest way to meet somebody. I said, why? She goes, well, out of that minute, so you're going to say something, and I'm going to go, hey, tell me more. So when we were doing it, she happened to mention she loved to play volleyball, and she wanted to play volleyball in college out of state. And so when we got done the one at a time little relationship builder, I said, tell me more about this volleyball. And this story just poured out of her. So simple little activity. And that one's called One at a Time, the one I told you. Another one I want to share with you is called High-Low Cheer. And you can use this one fairly easily. You can use it as all 3, or you can use it as pick one of them. So I would turn to my group, let's say, because I do this a lot, I'll be working with your staff middle of the year, summertime, doing a retreat, and I'll find a strategy to get people to connect with someone they don't know super well. They can be in the same department, same office, but just not their best friend. And say, hey, would you tell your partner what's something that's gone well in the last couple weeks? What's been something that's been challenging for you recently? A low, something you're having to deal with. And then a cheer is, who is someone in your life you're trying to cheer on right now? And the reason I say you can use it all 3, maybe you give each person 3 minutes. So I turn to my partner and I go first. And in those 3 minutes, I tell them about a high, a low, and a cheer. And then after 3 minutes, we switch. My partner does the same thing. What's starting to happen when we do these relationship builders is people start to look past some of the stereotypes we have. Some of you have the stereotype because, oh, well, the AP teachers do this, or the coaches do this, or, oh, the third grade teachers do this, and we start to have these assumptions about other people based on a title, a grade, an age. And what starts to happen is people start to hear the reality of what's going on in people's lives. And sometimes these are academic. Man, a high right now, one of my students that was really struggling, something has changed. They're getting to class every day. They're focused and they're doing well. Sometimes they're personal. You know, all of a sudden there was a low. I was working recently in North Carolina, and they said, yeah, one of the lows that we're dealing with, our cafeteria manager just lost her mom and she's grieving deeply. And we can all see the change in her. And then a cheer is, you know, sometimes you're cheering somebody on because they're going through something well, or maybe someone's struggling. Maybe the cheer might be, we're trying to cheer on that cafeteria manager. But when I was doing with that group, about four of them went, wow, that's right. And a couple others in the district, it was a district retreat with their leadership team. They said, I hadn't heard that. I know her pretty well. Let me kind of do what I can to prop her up. So what it does, it just gives us a little bit of knowledge. You're not spending a ton of time, but you're spending enough time that people go, you know what? Yeah. And so what I want you to do is feel free to take a picture of any of these slides and just be thinking about, you know what? If we're going to do that, how might we do it? Do we have enough time for everybody to do all three? Or do we have the time so each person picks one? Maybe you give them 90 seconds and they tell a high, their partner might tell a low, or might tell a cheer. So one of the things I want you to think about right now are how are your people doing? As a leader, would you say that you're thriving? Are you striving? Are you just surviving? As a staff, are they thriving, striving, or surviving? And you think about the overall campus culture, what would you think? And you might just take a note to yourself to come back to this a little bit later. Because one of the things we like to talk about in our little company is what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? And I'll tie that in a little bit later. But if I were to walk onto your campus today, tomorrow, next week, what would I feel? If I walk into the main office, what would I feel? What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? And one of the interesting barometers that we like to ask people to consider is what about that FedEx driver or that UPS driver? If someone were to say, hey, tell me about that school that you just walked out of, what would they say? Because they feel it. They're in there, what, for 90 seconds, 3 or 4 minutes, they have to get a signature. But oftentimes they're in there every day. The Amazon drivers, a lot of times they're different people coming in, but man, that UPS driver, typically the FedEx driver, they have a feel for your school, whether people look at them. So then to stop and think about, are we thriving, striving, or surviving? Because when we consider that, it's like, So I'm going to ask you to go to the chat box and think about your overall culture in your building. Some of you are at a district office, some of you are on a school site. Would you say that culture is thriving, striving, or surviving? I would invite you to put that and just have a chance to take a look and see, oh, I'm not the only one. Because some places, man, you're thriving. You're like, things are rocking. And some of you are like, no, we're striving. We're working on it, but it's struggling. And some of you are like, yeah, we're just surviving. We're hanging on with fingernails. I have to bend down to be able to see the chat box. Yeah. See a lot of strivings. That's good. Angela, I can understand that surviving. Yeah. Jacqueline, yep. So many different reasons these turnovers are happening. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah, interesting. Over the last couple of years, you're building. I know you're building. And I got to imagine some of your departments are doing pretty well, and others are hanging on. And it's yeah, just an interesting deal. So we stop and think about that. One of our fun stories, Casey Giovanni told us. He said when he took over principal at a large high school in Central California, he said, "I thought my job was to work on student achievement." He said, "I did a quick survey with my staff and found out something like 80% of them did not like working there." And he went, oh my gosh. And his activities director said, hey, you might want to go to one of the school culture summits that Learning for Living does. And he said, I went there thinking, okay, this is going to help me with student culture. He said, you guys spent most of the time on adult culture. And he said, we just started doing a lot of those little tiny moments that you guys taught us. And he said, a year later, I did the same survey and it literally had flipped. 80% of my staff was now thinking, I like it here. I want to be here. I can grow here. And they went from struggling to starting to thrive, striving for sure. And now 3 years later, they are just thrilled because it's so cool to work there. And what they were is there's all these little tiny moments. And so that's what we want to do is we want to just give you not a bunch of new big things because the truth is to get overwhelmed with a bunch of big things isn't going to help you. But if we can give you some of these little things, I didn't pull it out, but I normally have a Rubik's Cube. Maybe you can take an idea that we give you and you might say, well, yeah, but I'm a K-3 school. How would that work? Or maybe I'm a rural high school. How would that work? What I'm going to invite you to do is to not say, yeah, but say, how might we turn the Rubik's Cube and make this work? So let's talk about that. See, we've been doing some digging into Vivek Murthy. He just finished his time as U.S. Surgeon General. I didn't realize he was gone for 4 years, but he was in Obama's second term, and then he was gone during Trump's first term, and then he was back during Biden's term. And one of the things I remember him saying 8 or 10 years ago, he said, when I became the Surgeon General, I really thought the big crisis in America that I was going to have to work on was diabetes and heart disease. And he said, what happened was it turned out that the #1 health issue in the United States is loneliness. And he said, at first, I thought it was going to be singles and this. He says, I realize it's our seniors, it's our kids, it's people in the middle. And I was golfing on Sunday with a guy prior to the Super Bowl. And he said, when I mentioned that, he said, oh, no doubt. I said, tell me more. He says, I retired a couple of years ago. I still work a little bit part-time, but he says, I realized all my friends were work friends. And he said, now I'm not going to work much anymore. I do these projects every once in a while, but a lot of times I'm in my own home. And he says, I've got to get a new set of friends. When you think about this, wouldn't it be cool if the folks that worked in your building, whether you're at a district office and a school site, felt like these are people that care about me. These are people that trust me. And it's interesting because one of the things he shared in a talk with Simon Sinek a couple of weeks ago, he said, as he's talking to young people, he said, they've been sold this idea that fulfillment comes from wealth, power, and influence. If they can be an influencer, they're going to get power and they're going to get rich. And he said, the truth is, where fulfillment comes from is service, purpose, and relationships. Well, if nothing else from this call, if you could take a picture of that right there and then maybe go to his talk with Simon Sinek and grasp what he talks about, because if we want to retain our teachers, if we want to retain the folks who work in our building and they can understand that education is not going to lead to short-term wealth, power, influence, but influence for sure, but the power in it, the real beauty in what we do in schools is it's around serving and having a purpose and relationships. And then when we get to the age that this man was there, 67, 68, we can look back and say, hey, I gave my life to things that mattered. And it's interesting because I ask people oftentimes, do you have enough to live on retirement? Every time I'm talking to an educator, they're like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. And it's interesting because when we think about that, we're like, yeah, if we can help people realize the beauty in what we do in education is through service and purpose and relationships, then guess what happens? Then all of a sudden people start to go, yeah, I want to give my life to this. So want to talk for a minute about the people first culture framework that we've created. First thing we want to do is cause folks to reflect on how do we take care of ourselves. Once we have ourselves taken care of, how do we build relationships between us and the folks we serve, and then the people? One of the most fun things for me to see when I visit a classroom is it's cool when this teacher has a good relationship with kids, but what really is magical is when I see students connecting with each other. When a kid says, I don't really understand, and a kid says, I can help you with that, and the teacher says, that's awesome. Because here's the truth. They might have that teacher for 1 hour a day for one semester, or they might have them for 4th grade that year, but pretty good chance they're going to be in a relationship with that other student, perhaps for the rest of the day in a high school or middle school, or perhaps for the next few years if they're an elementary kid, because then it's about cultivating trust. Because when there's trust between leadership and the folks that we're serving, then there's a tendency, but trust doesn't happen anymore because it's our role. I trust you because you're the leader. No, We get the trust because we feel connected through those relationships. And the last thing is, how do we infuse this people first mindset in everything we do? How do we get that veteran coach to take the time to spend with that young person, to find the balance between how am I coaching this sport when I got two kids of my own at home? Or how is it that I can find the balance between my workday and managing the drama class or putting on a play? And see, that's the thing, that when we can infuse that mindset into the folks that are in our building, wow, it makes such a difference. So here's two things that we want to encourage you to do as leaders. One is to learn the pause. I'll share that in a second. And then consider your daily rhythms. What are the patterns that you find yourself doing? Let me tell you about the 90-second pause. Two thoughts here. Number one, what I'm going to invite you to do, and try it for a week and see how it works for you. Put some type of journal, notebook, just a yellow pad on your passenger seat. And if you're one of those folks that you got to go grab your kids and they're all over the car, that you might want to put it somewhere else. But a lot of you get in your car and you drive home 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. Wouldn't it be cool if you fire up the engine and for 90 seconds, you pick up that yellow pad, that journal, and write down what are two or three things that happened well today? See, here's what when I've asked people to do this and they've done it, what they tell me is they say, a lot of times something happened at 8:30 in the morning that was really cool, but by 3 in the afternoon, I kind of forgot about it. So I drive home thinking about what happened the last 20 minutes or last 2 hours of the day, and I'm not happy because I forgot some really cool stuff. Here's another thought. What if you write down two or three things that went well for you, but then you also write what were two or three things that your team did? If you're the principal of school, some of the staff members, whether they're classified, certified, if you're a classroom teacher, what happened with your students? Whatever your role is, maybe you're a superintendent, man, your director did this. Wouldn't it be fun if on Friday you look back at that and every day you wrote for 90 seconds, maybe two or three things a day, but on Friday you just read back through that list. And let me tell you something real personal. Lori and I have been married 40 years now. And if you've ever been married for very long, there's ups and downs. But one of the treasures that we have is every week we write down something that week that was really cool or maybe really hard. And we keep track of it. And then at the end of the year, we spend time sitting on the couch or maybe at a restaurant and we read 5 or 6 weeks at a time. And it's amazing when we're like, oh my gosh, I remember that. It was Rosie's birthday and that happened. Or we were at the beach and we saw this, or we met those people. And those are the kind of things that get in our mind to go, you know what, there's some cool stuff going on. Here's the deal. I shared that with a superintendent recently. And what he said, I'm going to ask my team to do that for 2 weeks. And he said, then I'm going to ask them to go back at our next meeting in 2 weeks and tell us what were some of the highlights. Because a lot of times what happens is we're so hurried to move on faster. So I'm going to ask you to do this right now. Take 90 seconds and write one thing. Today's Thursday. If you're listening to this live, what's one thing you're proud of so far this week? Something that's gone well. Write that on a piece of paper, and I'd love to read a couple of them in the chat. A couple things in the chat would be kind of fun to go, oh yeah, something you're proud of that happened this week. Personal, professional, something you did, something your staff did. Jacqueline Gallagher, congratulations. That's very cool. Tom, gotta love those baseball cards, man. Darren, yep. Very cool. Man, it's fun when kids do that. Yeah, Sarah, it's interesting. I don't know if that's ever been written into a job description, but It's pretty huge. I remember Ron Severson was superintendent. He said when he was principal at your school years ago, he said, I went by a family's house thinking there'd be a lot of people after a death in the family. I was the only one there. And sometimes we assume we're just going to be one of many, but yeah. Yeah, Cassandra, great. Yep, Angela. So let's talk about these tiny moments that we can do ourselves to help create a rhythm. Because what happens is some of you have been reading some of these books on habits, James Clear, Atomic Habits, and some are like, well, okay, I want new habits, whether it's physically taking care of myself the way I eat. But what Shai and I have figured out in our little company is these tiny moments that we can do that make a big difference over time. Afa Huckabee, who was just, if you're in California, he was selected, awarded, however it was chosen to be the state principal of the year. And he happens to be one of our clients, went through our People First retreat a couple years ago. And he told us, he said, one of the things he started doing is just getting away from technology for those 2 hours. Come home, put the phone, the computer away, and just boom, spend time with the family. Ken, it's kind of fun. He came to our People First retreat. We find out we went to the same high school a few years apart, but he said, you know what? I realized I'm giving too much of my life to work and not enough to my kids. And he said, so now I come home and we make dinner together. And he said, what happened is I'm not eating out of my car, and he lost 50 pounds. I mean, we didn't talk about diet. We didn't talk about food choices, but he said, you know what it was? All you did was coach me on how to take care of me first. And, Bob said, as a superintendent, he says, I just say, hey, let's do a walking meeting just to do that. One of the things I've started doing is I just get out of bed, I turn, and I just sit on the edge of the bed for 5 minutes before I move and just go through my gratefuls, think about what I want out of the day. Leslie, she told us one thing she had to do. She said, because I'd come home, I'd be busy. I knew I wanted to go for a walk. She said, I don't run anymore. But she said, I walk in the door, and when I shut the door, the first thing I see is my shoes, my running shoes. And she said, I have to make a choice. Either I step over them or step into them. And it's so interesting because she said, I'm walking a lot more. Tiny moments. Cheyenne, just say, I'm doing meal preps on the weekend, so I make better choices during the week. And it's so interesting to stop and think about what are those tiny little things that we might do, because it's those tiny things adding up that makes such a difference. So go ahead in the chat box. This is kind of fun for me not to do all the talking, but you guys get to look. What's one thing that you know helps you stay healthy during your busy weeks? Go ahead and put that in the chat box. Hey, Sarah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. I was just wondering, could you tell us about walking during supervision? Just jump on, take yourself off mute. I'd just love to hear your 30-second thought on it. How do you do that? Natalie, texting your daughter during college? Oh, don't know how to unmute. Yeah, if you go all the way to the bottom of your screen, all the way to the left, audio should be audio. You might take it off. Or Arlen, I don't know if you have to do that, but Sarah, if you want to give it a try, bottom of the screen and all the way to the left. You may not have that option. Okay. Sorry about that, but hey, let's talk about building relationships. There's two different ways that we'll talk about. One is organic ways, things that just happen. And the other is when we structure them. We say, hey, let's do this ourselves. So let's take a look at one of the things that we learned a while back was the power of a ways conversation. So many times we as leaders, we're just living on time. Either we're not available or they're not available. And so one of the things I learned from my friend Heather Garcia, when she was assistant superintendent, prior to that, she was a principal. She said, Phil, I would figure out who I need to talk to and try to catch them in transition. She says, I knew they were walking from one place to another. And she said, what I found is that I would have a lot better conversation in those 60 or 90 seconds than standing in front of a staff meeting. Because a lot of times I was in front of a staff meeting, I could see someone have a different look, or maybe they had their hand up, but we didn't get to everybody. And I'd circle back, and some of these conversations happen in stairways, hallways, doorways. My friend Kim Baer tells a story about they had back to school night, and she said, I was standing there in front of my 30 parents or whoever was there for my class that night. And she said, all of a sudden, my principal was standing in the door, Jess Borhan. And he said, Miss Baer, do you mind if I say something to your class? And she, oh, yes, guys, this is our principal. And he goes, I just want to tell you that if your child has chosen to take Miss Baer's leadership class, it's going to change the trajectory of their life. She teaches such most important things. Some people call them soft skills, but he goes, as a leader, I know how critical they are. He said, congratulations. Thank you, Miss Baer. He walked off. I remember that story. It was probably 10 or 15 years ago, because I couldn't believe my principal did that. It was so awesome. See, here's the deal. As leaders, you may not be a site leader. You might be a classroom teacher. You might be, the point is, can you imagine standing in the doorway of a colleague or someone on your team and doing that where you just praise them? It doesn't have to be long. It just be 30, 45 seconds, a minute, just to say, you know what, she's every once in a while I see Kim and she goes, you still telling that Jess Borhan story? I said, yes. Why? Because it's so powerful. And you stop and you think about that when we communicate with these people. There's a custodian that I ran into. Some of you know I have a podcast. Cheyenne, my business partner, and I, we have a podcast called School Culture by Design. And someone said, you got to talk to Steve Moose. I'm like, who's Steve Moose? They said, they call him the mentor with the mop. I'm like, well, what does he do? They say he's the custodian at an elementary school in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. So I called him up, said, hey, he goes, I've never done a podcast. I said, you'll be perfect. And so we got to talking and turned on the record button. And I said, so why do they call you the mentor with the mop? He said, well, I decided to get out of sales years ago because it wasn't fulfilling. I wanted to do something that mattered. So he said, I just got the custodian job as a starting place. And he says, but I love it. He said, a lot of times our elementary school, I'm the guy that decorates the front entrance when people walk in the building, and I put a theme together, whether it's around a holiday or something. But he said, we have back-to-back lunches where like every 5 minutes, these kids leave and 5 minutes later, I don't have time to clean the lunchroom all at once. So while they're eating, I'm in there cleaning up messes, sweeping up fries. And he said, the kids like to help. But what started happening a while back is kids would come up and say, hey, Mr. Moose, can I ask you a question? Sure. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? He said, well, the Chiefs, they always win. And the kid laughs, no. And he said, but sometimes those questions get a little more serious. I said, like what? He said, well, a while back, a kid asked me, Mr. Moose, my parents are getting divorced and they want me to tell them who I'm going to live with on the weekends or the week. And I said, well, Steve, what'd you tell him? He says, ask me tomorrow. I said, why'd you say that? He said, I had to go home and ask my wife what to tell this kid. And I laughed. He said, no, dude. He said, I asked my wife a lot of things. And I think some of you on this deal are like, yeah, maybe I don't have a wife to ask, but I have a friend, because sometimes these kids come up to us with something real. And it was so interesting. I said, what grade was this kid in? He said he was in 3rd grade. And these kids came to him because, you know what he says? I have staff members come. He said, I just want to be available. Here's what I know. We have some folks in our building that are just amazing people. And sometimes we don't know them. But when we can start looking for every opportunity to create those people first moments, it becomes the lens we look from. And if we stop and we think about what little thing we do, is sometimes it's taking something we're already doing and we turn the Rubik's Cube and we shift it a little bit. One of the culture ideas we want to give you is the appreciation station. And we were doing a webinar a week or two ago, and Josh Nehu said, hey, I just did something yesterday. He created an appreciation station for his staff. He's in elementary school, Corning, California, and he put these little gift bags in the room when they came in, and just some really cool little things. And he had their name on each one of them. He said, my staff loved it. Something else that I don't have a picture of today, but my buddy George up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He was working at Harry Ainley High School, and he said, we just decorated the staff bathrooms. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, most staff bathrooms are pretty generic. You walk in and you do, and he said, so we just went to Bed Bath and Beyond, and he said, we bought some cool, smell good stuff, and we put some little pictures in the bathrooms. He said, we just have 4 scattered around our campus, a large campus. And he said, the teachers thought it was the coolest thing ever. Here's the deal. Maybe your bathroom's already okay, but you turn that Rubik's Cube and say, what can we do with the faculty room? And one school told me, well, we just personalize it. We asked everybody on staff to send us a picture of what mattered the most in their personal life. And with permission, we could display it, and we put them up on the walls of the staff room. He said, all of a sudden, people had a reason to go there because they want to see the picture of their friend. These little things. Another one that's really fun to share is called Moonshot. And again, be careful that you don't say, yeah, but. My friend Tanner Smith, who was the principal at that time at a little school in Southern Oregon, Grants Pass area, he said, I'm trying to get our attendance up. And he said, we were struggling. And he said, we're in an area, it's rural, it's pretty hard for kids to get to school. So he said, I got this idea, played with it a little bit. And he said, we have a cafeteria with a stage, not quite like that picture there, but cafeteria with a stage on. He said, I went and got one of those medium-sized kids basketball hoops. It's kind of plastic. It's about 6 feet, maybe 5 foot high. And he says, I duct taped it to the stage. And then he said, I got a Nerf basketball, about mid-size, about the size of a volleyball. And I put a little bit of duct tape to make it a little heavier, wrapped it. And he said, then I got in the announcements and said, hey, students, in a minute, I'm going to say Moonshot, 5 minutes. That means I'm going to ask you to come down to the cafeteria. I'm going to select the names of 10 students. They're going to get a chance to shoot this basketball. If they make it, they win $100. I will have a $100 bill for you guys to see it. He says, if more than one student makes it, 10 kids get to try, I'll go get another 100 and give it to them. But you got to be here to have a chance. I said, what happened? He said, I yelled Moonshot. Kids, he said, we have about 350 kids on our campus. They came into the cafeteria like, what? He said, I had a big jar, reached in, every kid's name was in there, and I called out these 10 kids. They came up, they shot. He said, a couple hit the backboard, one hit the rim, but nobody made it. He said, I looked at the students, they were loving it. He's like, oh, man. He said, look, if nobody makes it, I'll add $10 to the next one. So next time we play this, it's $110. But if I pull your name and you're not in the room, you don't get to play. You got to be at school. He said, so the next week it was 110. Nobody made it. A couple kids got close. He said, the third week, now there's 120 on the line. He said, I looked over and the cafeteria crew was watching. And he said, so I just reached in, pulled out one and said, Miss Rosie Connors. And she's like, no. And the kids yelled, yes, Miss Connors. So she came over, she threw Miss, and she said, never call me again. But the kids loved it because all of a sudden she's not just putting food on her plate, but she became real. Now you stop and think about it. If I have the numbers right, his attendance was something like 83, 84% when he started this. 4 years later, when he left to move on to another school, I think they were at 91%. And he said there are a variety of things we did, but he said certainly Moonshot added to the fun. Why? He said they never knew when I was going to do it. I might do it twice in 1 week, and I might skip a week. And he said, but kids were showing up, Mom, I got to go. It might be Moonshot, not just for them, but maybe they got to see a friend shoot. And they wanted to be there if someone ever won 150 or 160 bucks. He said every once in a while a kid would win. But here's the deal. This is where I want you to really think about this Rubik's Cube idea. Some of you are sitting going, well, that wouldn't work because I have 3,200 kids on my campus, or I've got 1,600. But what if you were to share this idea with your staff and said, I'm going to give a fun award, something you can think, for the staff member who can turn the Rubik's Cube in a way that could take the Moonshot idea and make it work in your classroom. Because maybe just by kids going, I want to do this in my class. Maybe it's just cornhole when they get a certain deal on a test, or they've been at school 7 days in a row, they get to throw a cornhole beanbag on a small board. And if they land the board, they get a candy bar. If it goes in the hole, they get to go to lunch 15 minutes early. I'm not sure, but I got to believe that your staff could start playing with this idea and see, this is what creates those moments that people are like, you know what? I like what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like. This one happened right there in Illinois. And some of you are like, oh yeah, I know the Porters at Lockport. And their principal, Jacqueline Johnson, Carrie Green at the 9th grade campus, Dr. Green, Dr. Johnson, They said, we've had so much fun with this. They just took a piece of paper. I think they said, because they have a pretty large staff, gave it to 8 or 10 people and they stuck it in their pocket. And then during the day, a staff member would come up and say, hey, do you have a porter in your pocket? But before they would answer the question, the person would have to say, you got to tell me one thing about you that I don't know. And so maybe they'd say, I love to rollerblade. And the person say, tell me something about you, and say, well, I have twins. And they're both 4 years old, which is twins, they're going to be both 4 years old, but, and then they'd exchange it. If they had the porter in the pocket, they had to pull it out, give it to the other person. If they didn't, say, all right, good luck. And what happened was all of a sudden the adults on campus were talking to people they normally didn't talk to. They'd catch the custodian, the speech therapist, the office worker, whoever it was. Hey, tell me one thing about you. The point wasn't just to ask for the porter in their pocket, just this random piece of paper. Now, some of you are kind of chuckling like, well, we did this a while back, but we did it with an Easter egg at that time of year, or we did it with a turkey at Thanksgiving, and we did it with something with Halloween. The point is, we've heard so many fun stories because at the end of the day, whoever has the porters in their pocket wins some prize, whether it's a $10 Starbucks card, or whether it's something, I can wear jeans on a school day, or maybe one of the administrators will cover my class so I can get some other things done. Whatever you want to make is the prize. But we heard one person say at 2 minutes to 3, this person was walking to their car with the porter in their pocket, and another staff member came running at them, and they tried to get in their car before they could get them. And they said, do you have the porter in your pocket? And they had to pull it out with like 30 seconds left. And these are the moments that cause our staff to say, you know what? I love being here, because it's not just a place I work, but it's a place I can thrive. So what I want you to do is stop and think about what's an idea that you could take and make it work this spring. We're not asking you to think about anything big, just what tiny moment, as you were listening to some of these ideas being shared, did you like, man, I wonder if I could get better at doorway conversations. Wonder what would happen if I invited the staff, the classroom teachers, age, to look at moonshot and say, no, we're not all going to do moonshot, but could you turn the Rubik's Cube and cause a kid to want to be there? One of my podcasts a couple years ago, she said, we have raffle Fridays, and every Friday a kid walks in my class and they get a raffle ticket. Sometime during the period, I call it a raffle number, whatever the kid win, they win a prize. And the prizes are up to you. Well, she said, I don't have any money to buy stuff. So I just went to the garage, threw a bunch of stuff in a box, and the kids reach in there. And one day a kid pulled out a fishing reel, no pole, no line. He's like, this is cool. And he was just treating it like a fidget. One time a kid got a Rubik's Cube. He didn't know how to do it. The kid next to him showed him how to do it. Engaging kids. When you think about this, it's Steve Jacoby, principal of the year in the state of Texas 1 year, and another year he was principal of the year in Arkansas. He said, I am going to have 100 conversations every day with folks on my staff. They're not very long, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Sometimes they're reminded of some of our core values. Hey, no surprises. I'll try never to surprise you. Please don't surprise me. If I'm going to get a call from a parent, please let me know. I may never get it, but at least if I do get it, I'll expect it. I'll do the same for you. How do we allow our staff to create some of those culture moments? I think maybe sometime we talk about our vision and go, that's what I'm trying to do, but I don't always have the best ideas. I'd invite you to help me out, because you got some folks. It's not about age, some 25-year-olds, some 45-year-olds. So what if we did this? What if we did this? I don't know if anybody's here from Oklahoma. I couldn't read the list that well, but this is one of the guys I really appreciate. Superintendent Chuck Perry, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. I think it's still the largest school in high school in the state of Oklahoma. And one of the things he does, he goes around every week and he does a quick video, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, highlighting something that's going well in their district. And I think what he says is, I'm just kind of dating my community, because a lot of times when we're in leadership, people only hear about us in really great things or really bad things. And what Chuck said, I want people to do is just get used to seeing my face. And he said, I'm always telling them great stuff. On occasion, I have to take a minute and explain to them why we need to pass this school bond or why we have to do something. But he says, most time, I'm just highlighting the Haley Hoovers out there. And one of the mistakes he made at first, he was doing it from his office. And Jason Jadamski, who works with us quite a bit, he worked with Chuck and he said, hey, Chuck, no, not in your office. That's too generic. Find a place on campus to celebrate people. The library, the locker room, the band room, the cafeteria, somewhere. So it's part of the community. Maybe even do it in town sometimes. And Chuck said, I never realized how many people would tune in and watch this. It's not very long. But what is it that you want to share with people? What is it you're thinking, you know what? If I had the chance to share a story, Afa Huckabee told me, he said when he got to Liberty High School as new principal, he said, I realized I have over 300 adults on my campus. He said, I was trying to get to know them, but he says, more than that, I wanted them to know one another. So he said, I just asked them all fill out a simple Google form with 5 questions. And I'm going to get up close and read them to you because, my eyes aren't good enough to read that right now, but I think you guys probably can. But little things about them. Where'd they go to high school? What is something they love to do? What's something about their family? Just 5 good questions. And then once a week, he prints this. He sends this out to the whole staff. And he said, of course, the 300 people, everybody didn't do it, but he got enough to start it. And he said, guess what happened? All of a sudden, people start going, I didn't know that about you. You went to high school in Texas? So did I. You were in Woodlands near Houston. I was in Austin. All of a sudden, they'd find each other on campus. He said, all of a sudden, instead of being a math teacher, a custodian, the school nurse, guess what? They were somebody. They were a person. And what's interesting, he said, I think I'm still the same guy I was when I was at my previous school, but he said, I got recognized as the state principal of the year because I started taking care of people first, including myself. And I think for a lot of you, like, you're right, I could do that. One of the other things that Paul Lumberg, one of our buddies, told us, he said, when I was principal at Colfax High School, he said, I had a custodian come up and say, hey, I really like to barbecue, grill out. He said, do you think I could do that sometime? He said, yeah, that'd be great. What would you like to do? He says, well, he says, don't we have a staff meeting coming up in a week or two? Wouldn't it be cool if you told people I was going to make them barbecue? He said, I could do something simple first, and eventually get to the point where I'm making like beef and chicken. And you know what? Paul said, when I resigned to move on to something else, he said, that guy came to me and said, do you think it's to be okay with the new principal if I keep grilling out? And he says, well, I'm sure they'd love it. And sure enough, the new principal's like, yes. But see, here's the deal. There's everybody on your staff. I think it was Cheyenne was telling me that the librarians, what they used to call a media arts person, you walk in the media arts building in her son's elementary school, and it's just a reflection of this person's energy. She says, you walk through, this is awesome. And who did this? She says, well, I did. And with some paint and some graphics and some furniture, she created a space where people like, but let's go back to that thought. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? When they ask these office workers, what do you want your office to be called? They say, how about the superhero headquarters? Now, some of you are looking at that going, oh, we don't have the money for that. Well, here's the deal. If you look really close, that's just construction paper. That's not a graphic. That's not glued on. They got together. Every one of your communities has some people with talents. Maybe this was kids. Maybe this is the art program. Maybe this is a group of parents. But what do we want it to look like, sound like, and feel like when people walk into our building? Well, what about your own office? I love to walk into administrator's office, just look around. Leader's office and just see what they have. My buddy John Devers, I remember walking into his office. There's a motorcycle helmet up on top of a shelf. There's a picture of a motorcycle about 6 feet off the ground. I said, is that one of your boys? He says, no, that's me. Well, I knew John at that time was 55 plus. I'm like, when was that? He said, last summer. I'm like, tell me the story. He said, I started riding bikes as a 5-year-old. He said, I still ride. And I said, why do you have that picture? He said, because whenever I have students come into my office, he said, as the assistant principal, he said, what usually happens is they're upset about something, them and the teacher, them and another student. So I say, hey, I'm going to get a water. Would you like one? I just give them 5 minutes to calm down, sometimes 10. And sure enough, almost every time they ask me, tell me about that picture. Something in my office makes them real. When I interviewed Danny Steele, he had a Superman picture behind his principal's desk picture. And he said, all of a sudden that story came out. And some of you didn't know Danny, he's pretty well known administrator. He retired this year and now he's running around doing talks for staff and conferences. You can reach him, just go to Danny Steele on Twitter, you'll find him. But what a gift that man is to education. And so I'm going to ask you to just go to the chat box. And I'd love you to type in, because it could be that you're going to write an idea in here. Someone else goes, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Because I think some of you have been writing as fast as you can. I'm talking, normally I do a school culture summit for 2 days, and I try to give you enough of that in this hour. When we do our 2 to 3 day administrator retreat, people first, we've got a lot of time. And I tried to give you a touch of that. But if you go in the chat box and what's one idea concept that you want to remember? Because I think as you write this down, I think someone else go, oh yeah, me too. Yeah. Turn the Rubik's Cube on doorway conversations. Yep. Thinking about a variation of moonshot. Very cool. Quarter in the pocket. Yep. Yeah. Turkey in the pocket, peppermint in the pocket. A lot of different varieties depending on what time of year you're doing it. Couple different ways that we partner, and then I'm going to open it up for any quick questions. If anybody can type a question in the chat box for me. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. I do district keynotes, admin retreats, cohorts. A lot of times come in and do school professional development. We take the whole staff, 150 of you, do 4 hours of community building so people get a chance to talk to and interact with people they normally wouldn't talk to. Kind of fun. We have a school culture summit coming up in Naperville in September. We did our first one out there this fall and had a blast. It was, some of you know, the Indigo Hotel in Naperville, that little downtown area. Just a gorgeous little spot. We had a 2-day experience. This bottom left picture is the administrative cohort we'll be having this summer. So you might recognize a couple faces there. We're going to send you, we call them connect cards, the PDF version. To mail them to you would be pretty expensive and a little weird, but what we did was we put about 20 connection questions on 3x5 cards, not 3x5, but business cards. And then we put a ring through them and we give them away at a conference. And because some of you are like, man, I love questions, but I can't ever think of them in time. So you just put it in your pocket, have it on your desk. You can hand it to someone and say, hey, read one of these. And just fun questions. What's your favorite food? What is, if you could go to a concert, who would you go to? Which friend would you take with you? If you could visit another country, which one do you like to go to? Just some cool questions that starts conversation. So if you'll click on that scan, we'll send you our contact information as well as the PDF version of these Connect cards. So last thing, last couple minutes, if there's any questions, if you'd like to throw a question, I don't know if you can get yourself off mute. If you can, then go ahead and do it verbally. Otherwise, just type one into the chat box and I'll see if I can answer something in the last couple minutes here. Lindell, I'm assuming when you say, how do you break up cliques with adults? Some cliques are by nature based on a department or a grade level. One of the things that we've done, and we can coach you on the phone a little bit deeper if you want, is when we go into a building, we're typically there for 4 hours. And, maybe there's 35 people, maybe there's 150 people, depending on the size of your staff. And we do a variety of mixtures to get people to move around a little bit in a fun way. And then we just say, hey, turn to the person, and we give them an activity that allows them to go to the people first. One of them is just to scroll your roll. We have everybody get their phone out. They go to their photo section, swipe it 3 times, and they tell their partner about the picture that came up. Maybe it's their dog. and they tell them the story about their corgi, or maybe it was a family reunion, or maybe it was a swim party last summer with their kid for their 8th birthday. But all of a sudden, these two people who are not in the same clique start to have a relationship, and you build on that. The other thing is just being really intentional whenever you get together to find ways, just taking a few minutes to get people, they're going to sit at the same table in the same row, but find a structure to go talk to someone else, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes. Then maybe the next time they come to the meeting, they're willing to sit by them instead of the safety of this person. Sometimes they don't even like that person that much, but they feel safe sitting with them. And Lindell, here's the deal. If you call our office at any point, just or send us a note on this QR code, we can give you, another 4 or 5 strategies and ideas. Because that is an issue in some buildings. The other issue is people who don't have a click at all. They walk into a room, they sit in the back row because they think it's an easy place to hide. And that's usually who the people you want to build your community, or they'll find another place to work. Yep. Sarah, I remember meeting you a while back. I think it was your first year when you and Martha were working together at that point. I was there for breaking down the walls. So yes, I remember an Antelope. Jacqueline, what's the best way to stop bullying you see happening without pointing fingers? I think sometimes what has to happen is we have to have a direct conversation. What I've found, Jacqueline, is sometimes we talk to the staff, or we talk to a department or grade level, the people who are not doing it are feeling like, oh man, am I doing this? And the people who are doing it are like, that's not me. And we didn't show it today, but we have a pyramid that talks about, we start with relationships and trust, engagement. The next level is a courageous conversation. On occasion, we just have to look at someone and say, do you realize this behavior is starting to diminish our culture? And pretty good chance they're going to be defensive at first. That's normally what we do. And then we go to blame, which is another form of defensiveness. But if we do it with directness and kindness, sometimes we circle back and the person says, I didn't realize that. On occasion, they're going to still be defensive 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later. And there's not much you can do about that until you have to go strategically to maybe move bodies, whether it's different part of campus or to different buildings. But we don't allow bullying to happen with kids, but oftentimes we don't go into education for conflict, and it starts to happen. For those of you still tuned in, I know a lot of you have had to run, but thank you so much for tuning in. And hopefully 1 or 2 of these ideas has been something you can resonate with. You see, I'm going to take that. And again, we're not trying to overwhelm you with big ideas, but a lot of tiny moments that can make those little adjustments. So thank you again for who you are, for what you represent, and every day walking that building just to be serving the adults and the students in that building. Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much for this presentation. I love all these strategies, all these ideas you're able to share with us in just 1 hour. Amazing what you were able to do, showing us how these tiny moments can put people first, which is just excellent. Thanks to all of our participants too for logging in and your great questions and comments and reflections as we move through the webinar. This is now going to be drawn to a close, and I will stop the recording.